Adam Schiff, now this is not the official Adam Schiff fan club, but he had a closing argument last night. And I think, by the way, Hakeem Jeffries, you just heard, was pretty compelling in his own right. But he had a closing argument last night that I think really encapsulated what we're fighting about right now and the choice that 100 men and women in the Senate have to make, and that you and me and the entire electorate are going to have to decide in November if this president is removed, and I don't expect he will be under any permutation, what we're really fighting about. So this, again, Adam Schiff, who is the lead house manager in this, this was the argument as he closed last night.
When we're done, we believe that we will have made the case overwhelmingly of the president's guilt. That is, he's done what he's charged with. He withheld the money, he withheld the meeting, he used it to coerce Ukraine to do these political investigations, he covered it up, he obstructed us, he's trying to obstruct you, and he's violated the Constitution. But I want to address one other thing tonight. Okay, he's guilty. Okay, he's guilty. Does he really need to be removed? Does he really need to be removed? We have an election coming up. Does he really need to be removed? He's guilty. You know, is there really any doubt about this? I mean, do we really have any doubt about the facts here? Does anybody really question whether the president is capable of what he's charged with? No one is really making the argument Donald Trump would never do such a thing. Because of course we know that he would, and of course we know that he did. It's a somewhat different question, though, to ask, okay, it's pretty obvious, whether we can say it publicly or we can't say it publicly, we all know what we're dealing here with this president. But does he really need to be removed? And this is why he needs to be removed. Donald Trump chose Rudy Giuliani over his own intelligence agencies. He chose Rudy Giuliani over his own FBI director. He chose Rudy Giuliani over his own national security advisors. When all of them were telling him this Ukraine 2016 stuff is kooky, crazy Russian propaganda, he chose not to believe them. He chose to believe Rudy Giuliani. That makes him dangerous to us, to our country. That was Donald Trump's choice. Now, why would Donald Trump believe a man like Rudy Giuliani over a man like Christopher Wray? Okay? Why would anyone in their right mind believe Rudy Giuliani over Christopher Wray? Because he wanted to, and because what Rudy was offering him was something that would help him personally. And what Christopher Wray was offering him was merely the truth. What Christopher Wray was offering him was merely the information he needed to protect his country and its elections. But that's not good enough. What's in it for him? What's in it for Donald Trump? This is why he needs to be removed. Now, you may be asking, how much damage can he really do in the next several months until the election? A lot. A lot of damage. Now, we just saw last week a report that Russia tried to hack, or maybe did hack, Burisma. Okay? I don't know if they got in. I'm trying to find out. My colleagues on the Intel Committee, House and Senate, we're trying to find out, did the Russians get in? What are the Russian plans and intentions? Well, let's say they got in. And let's say they start dumping documents to interfere in the next election. Let's say they start dumping some real things they hacked from Burisma. Let's say they start dumping some fake things they didn't hack from Burisma, but they want you to believe they did. Let's say they start blatantly interfering in our election again to help Donald Trump. Can you have the least bit of confidence that Donald Trump will stand up to them and protect our national interest over his own personal interest. You know you can't, which makes him dangerous to this country. You know you can't. You know you can't count on him. None of us can. None of us can. What happens if China got the message? Now you can say, well, he's just joking. Of course, he didn't really mean China should investigate the Bidens. You know that's no joke. Now maybe you could have argued 3 years ago when he said, hey, Russia, if you're listening, hack Hillary's emails. Maybe you could give him a freebie and say he was joking. But now we know better. Hours after he did that, Russia did, in fact, try to hack Hillary's emails. There's no mulligan here when it comes to our national security. So what if China does overtly or covertly start to help the Trump campaign? You think he's going to call him out on it? Or you think he's going to give him a better trade deal on it? Can any of us really have the confidence that Donald Trump will put his personal interests ahead of the national interest? Is there really any evidence in this presidency that should give us the ironclad confidence that he would do so? You know you can't count on him to do that. That's the sad truth. You know you can't count on him to do that. The American people deserve a president they can count on to put their interest first. To put their interest first. Colonel Vindman said, here right matters. Here right matters. Well, let me tell you something. If right doesn't matter, it doesn't matter how good the Constitution is. It doesn't matter how brilliant the framers were. It doesn't matter how good or bad our advocacy in this trial is. It doesn't matter how well written the oath of impartiality is. If right doesn't matter, we're lost. If the truth doesn't matter, we're lost. The framers couldn't protect us from ourselves if right and truth don't matter. And you know that what he did was not right. You know, that's what they do in the old country that Colonel Vindman's father came from, or the old country that my great-grandfather came from, or the old countries that your ancestors came from, or maybe you came from. But here, right is supposed to matter. It's what's made us the greatest nation on earth. No constitution can protect us. Right doesn't matter anymore. And you know you can't trust this president to do what's right for this country. You can trust he will do what's right for Donald Trump. He'll do it now. He's done it before. He'll do it for the next several months. He'll do it in the election if he's allowed to. This is why, if you find him guilty, you must find that he should be removed. Because right matters. Because right matters. And the truth matters. Otherwise, we are lost.
Well, here now to discuss both the strategy of the Democrats and soon the Republicans, the battle over witnesses, and so much more, former federal prosecutor Roland Riopelle, who certainly knows his way around a courtroom and the power of presentation. And Roland, it's funny, I've watched every minute of this, shame on me, and probably you, but the majority of the American public is consuming this in snippets here or there. Who is the audience for Adam Schiff? Is it those 4, 5, 6 Republican senators he's trying to convince? Is it the American public? Is it a public that's only consuming this, as I said, in small increments, so they'll repeat the same thing over and over? Before we get to how he's doing, who is he doing it for?
Richard, I would say he's doing it for all of the above. I think, he is aware, as we are all aware, that only pieces of what he's doing will ultimately be broadcast on the evening news. But he's trying desperately to persuade those 4 or 5 senators that he needs to bring in more evidence to the case. So he's pitching right to them as much as he can. And the way to do that is to try to persuade the American public that the right thing to do is to have a full trial here with the witnesses that are missing. And if you can persuade the public of that and make the polls move in that direction, he will stand a better chance of persuading those 4 or 5 senators to swing his way. So he's really talking to all of those groups that you mentioned.
Give, if you could, Roland, apparently there's a trick that you guys do, and you've been on both sides of the aisle as both prosecution and defense attorney. The reason why they keep saying the same things, as I understand, there's almost like a 3-step thought process. You introduce it, you reinforce it, you try and close with it. What's the reasoning why they keep coming back to some of the same clips, some of the same arguments time and again?
Well, the real truth of the way the world works, Richard, is that juries, children, and everybody else often learn through repetition, right? You and I learned our multiplication tables by repeating it. And the repetitive thrust of information into someone's mind is important to make it stick. And in this case also, anytime you have a jury of any kind that's listening to a lengthy presentation that lasts several hours or more, they're going to zone out a little bit at different points. So they may not pay attention the first time a piece of evidence is put before them. And so putting it before them 2 or 3 times in a summation of the type that Congressman Schiff has given will give you a better chance of having the jury focus on the evidence you're interested in at least once. So that's why you do it.
Gotcha. We understand, and in part because Jay Sekulow said as much this morning, that late last night and today again, Democrats have tried to preempt the argument they expect here from Trump's counsel and those presenting his arguments that, hey, it's about the Bidens. And they're going to take every opportunity to talk about Burisma and Hunter Biden and, by extension, Joe Biden. To that end, is it a mistake? Is it really what clearly Republican senators want, an excuse not to call for witnesses? And in any way, shape, or form, could Judge Roberts, if he wanted to, say, move on here? Let's stick to the real facts of this case as to whether or not the president either obstructed justice or abused the power of his office.
Well, that's a very interesting legal and strategic problem in the case here. In the typical case, Richard, evidence that related to the Bidens would be pretty clearly irrelevant, and the prosecution in the person of Congressman Schiff could feel great confidence that the judge would rule against the person offering that evidence and keep it out of the case. And indeed, the judge in this case likely would make that ruling, I think. Justice Roberts is a brilliant man. He knows enough about the rules of evidence, I think, to know that Hunter Biden's conduct and Joe Biden's conduct here is irrelevant to this case, and he would make a ruling that it's irrelevant. But in this case, unlike the typical trial, there's an immediate appeal to the Senate, and if 51 senators disagree with Justice Roberts, they can overrule him right then and there. So unlike the typical trial where the judge makes a ruling and you just have to go on and accept it, at least until the appeal a year or two later, in this case, the Senate could immediately overrule Justice Roberts, and given Senator McConnell's stranglehold on the Republican caucus, I think there is a good chance that there would be 51 votes to hear this evidence about Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. And indeed, we may see a situation where that is the only evidence that's put in the record, because he may have 51 senators vote that we don't want to hear from Mick Mulvaney or Mike Pompeo or anybody else with actual proof in the case. So that could happen.
So, to the layperson, there's a couple of absurdities that are going on right now. One is, we know that John Bolton has firsthand account knowledge of what the president has to say. It's gone without any protest that, in fact, he labeled withholding the Ukrainian aid for those conditions a drug deal. He also referred to the president's personal attorney as a walking hand grenade. And yet, we're having this debate that 4 Republicans don't see fit to have him, the chief of staff, and other material witnesses to come testify. Now, then you have an outward threat. I label it a blackmail from the president last night through his intermediaries to say, by the way, if Republicans so dare to have the temerity to have these witnesses come forward, I will exercise executive privilege. The idea that the person who's basically on trial right now will get to decide what documents and what people, we the people, get to hear from is, again, joining me in bizarro world. So again, you're the attorney, I'm not. But I gotta think, we're gonna look back at this window of time to say, what were we doing? If Republicans really will capitulate to those kind of demands, my God.
Well, again, Richard, it will be interesting, because what will happen if, let's say, John Bolton is compelled to appear in the Senate? If he asserts the executive privilege, there may be many circumstances where it would be asserted improperly. I think that's what Donald Trump would want. He would want a blanket assertion that covers everything and prevents Bolton from testifying about anything. That would be improper. Congressman Schiff could object to that and ask Judge Roberts to rule. Judge Roberts could then rule, no, there's no executive privilege covering that particular conversation, and Mr. Bolton, you must testify. The only appeal then is to the Senate at large, and if, Richard, they've had 54 senators, or whatever the number is, vote to have a subpoena to John Bolton to hear his testimony, I'm pretty sure they'll have 51 senators who will uphold Justice Roberts' ruling in a situation like that, because the Senate will want to hear from John Bolton in those circumstances. And then Mr. Trump will be out of gas, and John Bolton will have to testify. And all Mr. Trump could do then would be to try to run to court in the District of Columbia and try to get some kind of injunction against the impeachment proceedings to stop them before Mr. Bolton testifies. And I think the chances of any district judge granting some kind of application like that are zilch.
Well,
so it's very interesting. If they authorize a subpoena for Bolton, I think he's not going to be able to assert an executive privilege improperly.
My final question is, and again, I think a lot of folks are missing this, that there's going to be a book from Bolton that's going to come out before the election. You're going to have more FOIA requests being finally answered. More documents are going to come out. And any of this rogues gallery that's been involved in this are going to have more stories to tell. We heard about an audio recording here that's even been right now as to, the rantings of the president as to why he wanted, the ambassador to fire.
He sounds like a mob boss. Taking out a hit on Ambassador Yovanovitch.
Exactly.
It's
Exhibit
disgusting.
Z on it. So to that end, would you say right now, if you're Schiff, would you say, all right, I'm doing my head count, and I just don't count the 4 Republicans. They talked that they'd be willing to do a witness trade. Would you consider going to Biden and saying, listen, Joe, you could do yourself a lot of favors if you come out here, since you got nothing to hide, and lay it all out here, if they'll give us Bolton, they'll give us Mulvaney or whatever. If they're willing to do that, after they make their arguments, starting tomorrow through Monday and Tuesday, and then they turn that down, I think that speaks volumes. Is there any chance we see a witness trade?
I don't know, Richard, and I know there's a large part of the commentariat doesn't think that Congressman Schiff or the Congress, the impeachment managers, should agree to allow irrelevant testimony from Biden in exchange for the relevant testimony of the other people you mentioned. I have a different view. I think they should offer that trade, provided you get not only Bolton, but also Mulvaney and Duffy and Pompeo and whoever else, and let the Republicans turn that down. Because if they turn that down, it's clear they have no interest in the truth, and you can flog that before the public quite a bit. And if they take the deal, keep in mind that it's a situation like the jury address situation that we see now. The impeachment managers will be putting on all those witnesses before Biden ever comes near a witness stand. Biden can prepare himself, Hunter Biden can prepare themselves for the sort of ridiculous and nonsense questions they'll get. And frankly, I think they ought to be able to make hay out of the whole situation. So it's a trade I would take. I mean, I'm a bit of a gambler. I'm sort of dressed that way, I guess. I'm a bit of a gambler myself, and you have to be a trial lawyer. That's a trade I'd take. Let's do it. Let them put on their irrelevant witnesses at the end and make fun of them for it.
I think you and I are in the minority here, Roland, but I'm with you. Put it out there and see the appetite they really have, and I think everybody would learn that they'd turn their cards down really fast, and I don't think they dare let Bolton take the stand. But either way, I think that would speak volumes. Roland, it has been a fascinating few days, and I appreciate you making some time for us tonight. Thank you.
Okay. Hope to see you soon, Richard.